This is a $13 laptop. No, really, it was $13 on eBay, plus postage. Let's tear into the packaging using our trusty knife and see if it survived the shipping. Somehow it did indeed survive transit, even with the fairly minimal amount of packaging. So, let's see what this cheap and very old $13 laptop can do. This laptop was made by NEC, a brand that isn't that well known for their laptops or computers, at least not in Australia. From the limited information I could find online, this was made in 1999. Taking a look around the laptop, you'll see it is definitely not in good condition. It's fairly worn and some of the keys are damaged. Also, there is definitely some corrosion. Before we get any further, I think it's time we test it out and see how it works. Given that the battery is dead, we'll have to stay tethered to the power adapter. Interestingly, to turn the machine on, you actually flick this switch on the side instead of pressing a button. First of all, we're greeted with the NEC logo, then the all-so-nostalgic Windows XP boot logo, followed shortly by the sound of my childhood. I could totally listen to that boot sound over and over again. That video will do just nicely. So, here we are in Windows XP Professional. I'm super curious to see what the specs are on this system. It looks as if we have a 333MHz Pentium II CPU paired with 128MB of RAM. It also has a 5GB hard disk. I assume it loses some of that space due to being formatted. The laptop also has a surprisingly competent 8MB ATI Rage LT Pro graphics processor. I'll be sure to test it out with some games later on in the video. One issue I have noticed, and one you've probably noticed as well, is that the screen is super dim. Like, it's very dark. I can't seem to control the brightness. Maybe it's because one of the keys is stuck. In the settings you can change the desktop brightness, but that isn't actually changing the screen's physical brightness, sadly. Although it is cool you can give yourself a seizure, if you so desired. I decided to look through the BIOS and couldn't find anything useful. There was, however, an interesting battery refresh option. However, the battery in this laptop has long since died. This particular model has a DVD-ROM drive, which was somewhat uncommon at the time. The stereo speakers on the palm rests are actually surprisingly good. Like, they aren't amazing, but they are definitely clear and have plenty of volume. Sadly, your hands are quite likely to obscure them as you type on the keyboard. Speaking of keyboard, this one here is, well, it's sort of a mess. But that's mostly due to age and heavy use though. The keys have plenty of travel, but several of the keys need to be pressed hard to even register a click. And that spacebar has definitely seen better days. Also, I have noticed that the floppy drive doesn't seem to work. You can insert disks, but the system just won't read them. The trackpad also works, it's just very small, a common occurrence on very old laptops. For the rest of this video, I'll be using this USB gaming mouse, and yes, it does indeed have USB. Looking around the laptop, we have an assortment of 3.5mm audio jacks, a volume control dial, a battery indicator, as well as a floppy drive. Around the back we have a PS2 mouse and keyboard port, a COM port, printer port, VGA output, and an expansion bay as well as the AC power input. Around the other side we've got S-Video as well as composite outputs, a small fan and one USB port, IR blaster, and 2 PC card slots. After a bit of digging I found an ancient Netgear wireless PC card. I found the correct drivers online, however it would just keep disconnecting from my network and would never connect to the internet. Even though it might be possible to actually get this connected to the internet, I really couldn't be bothered going through the hassle. So, this laptop is definitely feature rich, and using the configuration tools on an archived version of NEC's website, I managed to work out that a configuration similar to this one back in 1999 would have cost about $3,149 US. That's actually slightly more than this Apple PowerBook G3 would have cost. Both of these machines actually have comparable specs. A link to my video on the PowerBook is on screen now. So, can this actually play games? Starting with Lego Island 2, this is sort of a 3D open world game and it does run, just not very well. Even with the resolution at 640 by 480 and the graphics on low, I could not get a decent frame rate. Next up is Grand Theft Auto 3. This laptop falls just below the minimum system requirements, and as such, it is not playable at all. If you prefer your games running at a cinematic 2 to 3 frames per second, then you might consider this playable. This isn't too surprising considering GTA 3 came out 3 years after this laptop was built. Here's a game that's surely going to work, Microsoft Golf. Teared up, Microsoft Golf is so real, you get everything but the exercise. I have fond memories of playing this back when I was super young. It runs great on this laptop, probably due to the fact that this hardware would have been unimaginable back in 1995. Microsoft Paint also works fine. Back when I was a kid, I'd actually make animations and draw everything in Paint and then animate it together back in Windows Movie Maker. Removing the battery was really easy. It's a 4800 mAh pack that wouldn't have lasted all that long, even back in 1999. Under this panel we get confirmation of the device's date of manufacture, the 22nd of April 1999. Once I removed all of these screws, I was able to remove the CPU and GPU that are a part of this daughter board that I assume connects to the motherboard. I also got a glimpse of how rusted the CPU fan is. Honestly, I tried cleaning up the corrosion that's likely caused by a leaking CMOS battery, but in all honesty I can't be bothered opening this system up entirely, so I'll leave it like this. So, would I recommend buying a cheap laptop like this off of eBay? Yes and no. Since it's a bit of a hefty device, the shipping cost was slightly more than the laptop itself. Unless you really want to play old games or seriously like Windows XP, I've found way better laptops just being thrown out or even given away. However, these older laptops are becoming harder and harder to find and as such are starting to become very sought after. Okay, maybe one's in slightly better condition than this, but I'm glad I bought this particular laptop. Even though it's quite flawed, it made for an interesting video. Somehow, even though it's rusted as well as corroded, it still works. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to help out the channel, feel free to leave a like, and if you've enjoyed, feel free to subscribe. After more than 2.5 months of having my channel's monetization removed, I finally got it back. So I'll be posting videos as soon as I can. Thanks for sticking around, I'll see you next time.